Paul Hembekides, ESPN's hottest new personality, joins us today to discuss Michael Jordan's son dating Scottie Pippen's ex-wife. Hembo pulls no punches.
Deshaun Watson stinks.
So strap on your seatbelt and get ready for that nitrous oxide. Jordan's son dates Pippen's ex-wife. And my question to you is, do you consider this a double dribble, offsides, or roughing the Pippen? Folks, special treat today. We got Sneaky Hembo on, and boom, he's got a new book out with Greenie.
Hey everybody, Greenie and Hembo on our new book.
Got Your Answers. It's a follow-up to Got Your Number. And after this, you're going to have so much desire to get up and get out and buy this book. Hembo, great to have you on.
It is a delight to be on with you. I appreciate the plug. I want to just ask you, first gut, you open it up for the first time. What did you think? What did you feel? What did you like? What didn't you like?
You know what? I'm the perfect guy to answer this question. This book, honestly, my overall impression is that it ties in the generations. This is going to go granddad, dad, kid. We're going to have happy families reunited again. You know, you haven't spoken to your dad in 15 years. You're going to reach out and be like, hey, look at this book. I agree with you. And that's what people aren't going to understand. That's like, I was like, wow, the whole gamut. You guys have put it in a very readable, user-friendly format, but it's for everybody.
So it's for everybody. That's an important caveat, because it was really important to us to sort of canvas the American sporting landscape. We didn't go full worldwide, but I'd like to think that we hit on enough different sports, enough different topics of expertise, enough both frivolous and serious sports debates that even if you're a casual fan, if you're a super hardcore fan, if you love some sports and hate others, if you like all sports, even whatever the case may be, do you think we nailed it from that perspective, from the perspective of the average fan will pick it up and find something and learn something about sports? What do you think?
Bases loaded, home run.
A grand slam, they call that.
I mean, wow. It's everything you could want, because not only that, you can go back and reference some of them. You're like, hey, I don't know about this. Let me go find this up on YouTube. Let me figure out exactly, what my father had PTSD about all these years, what sports events damaged his psyche.
So tell me, give me either a chapter or an argument or something to that effect that convinced you that you were previously wrong about something. Does anything there come top of mind for you?
There is. And you guys, and I don't want to bring in Mike Tyson, but I'm going to drop Mike Tyson in there. All right? That's going to be and you guys knew you were doing that, because you'll read through the list 15 times and you'll try to go, maybe I missed something. Maybe this isn't some kind of weird font or italicized wrong. And then you realize once you read it, I can't argue with you guys anymore.
Okay. So I think that a good faith argument can and is made by, we'll call it the average boxing fan, that Mike Tyson is inarguably one of the 10 greatest heavyweights of all time. But let's not use recency bias here. Yes, Mike Tyson dominated his sport at a time in which it was at its zenith, and dominated the sport so spectacularly that we all know who he is and his character has endured until present day. However, boxing in this country has been a big thing for more than 100 years now. There's some legendary heavyweights, many of whom remain at the top of the mountain much longer than Mike Tyson did. So if you were to say all boxers in history in their peak for one fight, there's no question that Mike Tyson won't only be in the top 10, but maybe inside the top 5. But that's not the question. To me, the marathon is the most difficult race to run in sports. And so many of the heavyweight boxers that we chose ahead of Mike Tyson ran that race with more endurance. That, to me, is what sort of separates the top 10 from Mike Tyson. You're not the first person that's actually given me that feedback. I've had boxing experts pissed at us for excluding him from the top 10. But after doing all the research, we stand by our decision. It sounds like we, if not won you over, at least you see our side of the argument.
No, once you break it down as not in terms of a few good fights or your potential, because let's face it, you traumatize Mike Tyson, you break his pigeon's neck when he's younger. He's insane from that point on. You got a human pit bull in the ring. But, he fizzled out. Let's be real. And as you bring up, you wake up in the morning one day and he's doing this fluky fight with Buster Douglas, and he loses. And then it starts free falling, spiraling downwards.
And I think that's his most famous fight. It's one of the great upsets, in the history of sports. Like, how can I put him on the same wavelength as Joe Louis and Muhammad Ali and Larry Holmes and Jack Dempsey when the most famous fight he ever fought was a legendary loss, was one of the great upsets in the history of sports. So that's a great answer to that question. If I were to ask you, you read one of our top 10 lists and vehemently disagree with where we landed despite our arguments, give me one of those.
And this is an easy one. Hembo. The Olympic gold medal. Look at the Olympics this year. What was the most memorable moment of the Olympics for you?
Wow.
There's only one answer. There's only one correct answer, and it still persists to this day.
The most memorable is it the the medal that was taken away from our gymnast?
You're gonna have to think about this Australian female breakdancer. All right, so we're living in back in the day. You'd have Alberto Tomba winning the Winter Olympic medals, but before that, he's winning more medals with the ridiculously beautiful European women. And you're watching this on the news as a kid. You're growing up and like, this is what I want. This is what I aspire to. But no one aspires to doing a kangaroo dance, shutting down the breakdancing.
Okay. So that's a point well made. Allow me to retort. If you would like to say that the Green Jacket or the Stanley Cup or the Heisman Trophy or the Kentucky Derby Garland of Roses is a more significant or legendary thing to win now, I would not necessarily object to you. But again, you were the one that just told me that it's important to connect sports fans across eras. There is no question that Jesse Owens' gold medals in 1936 are the stuff of legend. That Mark Spitz's gold medals in the 1980 Olympics in the pool are the stuff of legend. Even that Michael Phelps' records that he broke are the stuff of legend. So I would say this. The Olympics have not necessarily stood the test of time to this day, but we have more than a century. We have a long period of time that say the Olympics are a very, very important thing to us worldwide. And so I would say that if you asked almost any person, Bill Russell said winning the Olympic gold medal was the greatest accomplishment he ever had. He won 11 NBA titles. Again, era to era. Right now, it might not be what it used to mean, but we're here looking to sort of represent long eras since gone in the history of sports.
You know what? You used my logic against me, and you won. I'm going to tap out on this, even though, for some reason, there's zero UFC here.
So we do not do any UFC in the book. There's one WWE chapter, which obviously couldn't be further from it. We have the boxing chapter, which you mentioned. We have a Muhammad Ali chapter. But UFC, candidly, is a sport that's so young, relatively speaking, at least to the public mainstream. We didn't want to rank something and make a definitive argument for something for which we didn't feel we were expert to do so. So we thought about doing a couple soccer chapters in here too, but international soccer just isn't our thing. So the last thing I would ever pretend to do or want to do is feign expertise in an area in which I'm not. And I would definitely not want to put myself up in a position where someone like you is asking me a credible question about something for which I don't necessarily have a good answer, why I ranked so-and-so over such and such. And that's why we wound up only choosing the list that we did. We're going to rank the 100 definitive sports lists with all of these hotly debated sports topics across history, but only things for which we felt like we were experts. That's probably the Cliff Notes way to answer that question, but your objection is more than fair.
Hembo, you know what you are an expert in is going from Cedarville University to ESPN. Tell us about this journey, and I believe it involves the 2 Ps of passion and persistence.
Well, those are definitely 2 of the sort of hallmarks of what gets you anywhere in life. And so at Cedarville, where I did my undergrad, I was basically, I want to be a baseball player when I grew up. Problem was, my slugging percentage was .350 across 4 years, and that's not going to get it done when you're playing Division II college baseball in Ohio. And so what I learned was not only was I not smart enough to get my business degree, like literally flunking out of business school, but I had to sort of pick up the pieces, get a communications degree, which is what I did. And then I went to LaSalle University, returning back home to North Philadelphia in the case of the university, and got a master's degree in education, thinking I wanted to go that route. But look, sometimes life presents you funny opportunities. I happened to run into an ESPN recruiter, and he and I just hit it off. I remained in touch until I got an entry-level job when an interview became available for the Stats and Information Group. So it's kind of funny where life takes you. I always tell people there isn't really anything fundamentally different between me and all my buddies that grew up loving sports, except for the fact that I failed out of business school. They didn't. I got the ESPN interview, and they didn't. Life's a funny thing. But when it's, when an opportunity presents itself to you, whether it be the interview opportunity at ESPN, whether it be the fill-in opportunity on Mike and Mike, whether it be the senior researcher position on Get Up, whether it be the co-host for Mike Greenberg on his national radio show, whether it be the co-author on 2 books that we've written together. The important thing is to be able to seize those moments, and I'd like to think that I've been able to do that really, really well.
You're a baseball genius. I'm a big golf guy. There's a lot that's going on similar with both these sports in terms of they need to speed up. We got the TikTok generation. Do you think that baseball has done enough right now? Probably the average game now is back to the 80s of 2 hours and 40 minutes or so. Is it good enough, even though nowadays, I swear, Generation Z has an attention span of about 3 to 4 seconds?
Yeah, that's right. TikTok has ruined everything, it seems. Maybe one of these days it'll become illegal in this country, for all I know. Here's what I do know. Baseball has an obligation to serve its constituents, to super serve the fans that it has. I've always felt that the best thing that baseball can do, which is contrary to, I think, what the national commentariat thinks, I don't think baseball should be chasing new fans as earnestly as people think. I think it's much more important to serve the fans that you do have. Because what winds up happening much too often is when you chase the new thing, you abandon the old one. And your core group of fans, that's what matters most. Because people as they grow up, people as they age, as we know, the median fan of baseball is older than all the other sports. That's not just to say that, it's not to say that baseball is dying out when it comes to young people. It is to say that people grow into their fandom for things. So, you might not be a big baseball fan when you're 15 years old, but when you're 45 years old, you're sitting on your couch at home, and every single summer night it's on your TV. You might be more inclined to love it then. So I do think that the rules changes enacted by Rob Manfred and previously Theo Epstein have gone a long way in improving baseball. I'm not a big fan of taking drastic measures to change things that have been around for more than a century. Changing institutions takes a long time, and if you do want to do it, what you have to do is a very deliberate, a very thorough, and a very progressive job of getting there. I think baseball is doing that well, threading the needle well. We've got the 3-batter minimum. We, of course, have the pitch count. We have the larger bases. We have the small things that Major League Baseball has put in place so that baseball looks a little bit more like what it did when it, sort of at its zenith. That's a good thing. But what we shouldn't do is bastardize something that has been so beautiful for 150 years at the expense of chasing down a young fan that might not be a baseball lover anyway, because you never know if that trade-off winds up being worth it.
I'm going to raise this issue again so we can continue to plug this book. But you bring up the steroid era in baseball, which to me was probably one of the high points. I mean, you're watching Sammy Sosa, you're watching Mark McGwire. Their rookie cards keep going up in value. It's insane. And then they're like, no more of this good time, no more of the fun stuff. Do you think maybe we should lessen up those rules a little bit?
I don't think Major League Baseball should permit performance-enhancing drugs or go back to the wild, wild west days. I do, however, think that it's terribly ashamed how McGwire and Sosa and Bonds and Clemens sort of have to be sacrificial lambs for an entire generation, because baseball was at its apex in 1998. I mean, I was 8 years old at the time. I'm sure you remember it too, how brilliant every day in that summer was when you were always checking whether or not Sosa or McGwire went yard. At that time, we didn't care that they had muscles popping out of their jerseys, right? Because at that time, we were entertained, and baseball was a few years removed from the player strike, and it desperately needed something like that to rally around, especially with what was going on in with Bill Clinton at the time. Like, there was just so much angst in the country, and baseball provided us with that release, and that was a beautiful thing. So I don't think baseball needs to get back to a place where offensive numbers are out of control and we're permitting the use of performance-enhancing drugs or anything to that effect. I do, however, think that baseball does, if not have an obligation, at least a responsibility to consider the fact that maybe, just maybe, the Hall of Fame would be a better place with Roger Clemens and Barry Bonds in it.
That's great that you brought up Barry Bonds, because he's rated highly in this book. We all kind of know that, maybe he enhanced a little bit. Now, here's the greatest travesty, and it's also mentioned here, and I totally agree with it. Pete Rose, Hall of Fame. We all gamble now. Gambling is literally 80% of sports, 90% of sports. I have a friend who, complete degenerate gambler, it'll be like a Venezuelan sand soccer league frisbee toss, and you can't focus on the guy. This guy is the opposite of like present in the moment, because he's made 15 bets in the morning and you're just trying to walk the dog.
I think it is very difficult for Major League Baseball not to be looked at hypocritically with all of the gambling money that is coming in right now, while Pete Rose sits outside the Hall of Fame. All that being said, none of the things that have happened since Pete Rose did what he did justify Pete Rose doing what he did. Now, all that being said, I think that there is a good faith argument that Pete Rose belongs in the Hall of Fame for all of the obvious reasons. I also think that there's a good faith argument, and this is where I fall, that Pete Rose does not belong in the Hall of Fame in large part because we know that he did was terribly wrong, and the one rule that he broke is the one rule that you can't break. The number of times that he lied about it, the fact that he did refuse to reconfigure his life, to me actually adds to the charm of Pete Rose. This might be sort of a renegade theory. Tell me if you agree. But I think Pete Rose is, I think the fact that Pete Rose is ineligible for the Hall of Fame, not in the Hall of Fame, is the best thing that has ever happened to Pete Rose. It has kept him eminently relevant. Because if Pete Rose were in the Hall of Fame, there would be nothing for 70-year-old guys in Wahoo, Nebraska to argue about when they're getting their haircut. To me, Pete Rose should never want to go in the Hall of Fame during his lifetime because it would take him from being like this shining city on a hill for all the baseball fans that grew up loving him in the 1970s to being like every other great baseball player that has ever come around.
I can't argue with that logic. I like it. You know what? It keeps him relevant. Now we got, in terms of the golf situation, you got Barry Bonds, and now we got kind of the Barry Bonds of golf, Tiger Woods. On ESPN, you guys have charted Tiger Woods' career 20, 30 years. You've seen his head grow. What is going on?
So Tiger Woods has obviously gone from being a scrawny kid to being a hulk of a human being. And a cynical person might say to themselves, he has an awful lot of injuries for someone who plays golf. And we well know that is, at least has been in other sports, a byproduct of performance-enhancing drugs. All that being said, the amount of physicality in the game of golf today is outrageous. I mean, half the guys on tour right now don't look like golfers, or don't look like golfers that were playing when you and I were growing up. That's for sure. Tiger Woods transformed the game. I don't have any obvious reason to believe that he was doing anything against the rules. I will say that Tiger Woods made it okay for a great athlete to golf. And for the longest time, that wasn't the case. I mean, Gary Player was an exception, not the rule. Like, that guy's jacked still to this day. But most everyone else looked really flubby. Most everyone else looked like anyone else that might be working on Wall Street or working in a dentist office somewhere. Tiger Woods really broke the mold in that sense. And I think it's been a great thing overall because some of the best athletes in the world now, whereas they would have never chosen to play golf, are golfing in large part because Tiger Woods opened that door and showed what having that kind of athleticism and having that kind of strength, what having that kind of club head speed could do for your career. So I actually think it's made golf infinitely more entertaining because that prototype would have never existed had Tiger Woods never come around.
Salacious part. Jordan and Pippen, and I'm glad you guys brought this up because it kept it real.
Yeah.
Jordan's son dates Pippen's ex-wife. And my question to you is, do you consider this a double dribble, offsides, or roughing the Pippen?
So I think this would be the dictionary definition of a double dribble. If I have to choose honestly, it's probably all of the above. But of those three choices, it's a double dribble. It is one of the weirdest stories I have ever encountered in sports. And I still don't really know what to do with it. It's so jarring to see them together. It's such a weird thing that happened. And it's one of those things where it almost makes you scratch your head because these were supposed to be guys that were lifelong friends. These were supposed to be guys that should have had a lifetime of happiness because of what they achieved together. And unfortunately, it turned into the ugliest thing ever. Like I know that not all endings are happy. Ask any legendary band how it always ends. It always ends this way. But does it really have to end this way? Does it really have to end with you and her together? Like, to me, that's most definitely crossing the line. And suppose I'll say that that's a double dribble.
Well, it's insane that, and you're a math guy. You do analytics. There's 7 billion people on the planet. There had to be a pool of at least 50,000 women. And you got to think, now, does Jordan try to wave his son off, or is he on the down low? Is he sneaky Jordan and just kind of giving him props on the side? Because it's mind-boggling that you guys are paired up forever. You're winning all these championships, and then your son has to go do this to this dude who's already, let's face it, Pippen's crying in court half the time. So, wow.
I don't exactly know what Michael would say in an honest moment, smoking his cigar on the golf course. if you asked him about his son's relationship with his wingman's ex-wife, but it's one of the most bizarre stories I could ever see in sports. It's the kind of thing that we probably don't talk about enough, to be honest with you. But I think it's so jarring to us it's hard to know what to say about it. So I kind of feel your pain there.
Come on, it is as weird as it gets. Let's get back to this. Is pretty much all you in this book, the Negro Leagues.
Oh yeah, this is the sweet spot for me. So I grew up much like you, I'm sure, knowing bits and pieces about the Negro Leagues and some of its great players, Satchel Paige and Josh Gibson and Cool Papa Bell, and some of the legendary figures for whom you would hear, apocryphal stories shared. And it was just sort of word of mouth. Like, you just had to take their word for who the best ones were, and a handful of them got in the Hall of Fame, and that was that. But fortunately, over the course of the last handful of years, we've gotten access to so much more data from Negro Leagues box scores, with just outstanding research by historians across the country, collecting mostly newspaper clippings from libraries around the country, that actually demonstrate to us who was objectively great, who was better than we thought, who wasn't perhaps the player that we thought, and also, perhaps even more importantly, how good the Negro Leagues were in relation to the American and National League. To me, it's an incredibly important thing when considering the history of baseball. So, a couple points I'll make to demonstrate the fact that I think the Negro Leagues were certainly not a lesser league. This is based on objectivity, not based on opinion. So from 1949 to 1962, 11 of the 14 National League MVPs, starting with Jackie Robinson, were black baseball players. So you ask the question, if the very best players in the Negro Leagues became the best players in the National League, is there any obvious reason to believe that an average Negro Leagues player would not have been an average National League player? To me, the answer to that question is no. They very likely would have been comparable players. We can also take it a step further, because we have hundreds of exhibition game data. It's not a perfect subset, but it is enough games to most definitely draw a conclusion should the numbers be loud. And incidentally, the Negro Leagues, those teams had a winning record against major league teams in exhibitions. And we're talking about hundreds of games. They won nearly 60% of their games against what would be the equivalent of AAA competition. And so when you consider that the great players in the Negro Leagues became that in the National League, and when you consider the fact that when the teams played head-to-head, the Negro Leagues teams came out on top more often than they didn't, well, there really is no strong argument that says the Negro Leagues were a lesser league. And so the fact that the Major League Baseball now considers the Negro Leagues equivalent to the American and National League, and all the other leagues that have came before, like the Federal League and the American Association and some of the leagues of yesteryear, to me, it's a triumph for baseball history. It's a triumph for baseball history. And so now Josh Gibson and Satchel Paige and Oscar Charleston and Cool Papa Bell and Willie Wells and Buck Leonard and Martin Digo and Cristobal Torriente and all the great Negro Leagues players can be remembered on equal footing, even if they don't have that sort of occupancy in our history, in our dialect over the course of time. It's never too late to start, and it's never too late to do the right thing.
People will look at you and think, oh, this guy's a numbers guy. But they don't realize you're a poignant numbers guy. Tell us about leading into your joy of sports when you're younger, while you can, and holding on to it, because I love this stuff.
So if you're anything like me, my love of sports, you might say, is multifactorial. So I obviously grew up loving watching sports just like everyone else. I loved watching the games. I found them to be gripping. I found them to be entertaining and breathtaking. But I also really enjoyed the box score. I enjoyed the back of the baseball card. I enjoyed playing fantasy sports. And to me, that's such a beautiful element of sports, is the fact that everything can be objectified and quantified, and better yet, compared across eras. And that's why some of the great numbers in the history of sports are emblazoned into my head to this day. Like so the day that I die, I'll know the number of consecutive games Joe DiMaggio hit for safely in 1941, and Bob Gibson's ERA in 1968, and the number of hits that Stan Musial had on the road and at home. These are things that have been emblazoned into my memory the same way as I know all the state capitals or how to count to 10. I mean, truly, baseball and sports in particular are beautiful in that they can occupy your brain with these things that you never, ever forget, like your favorite song. For me, that's how my brain works. I think about my favorite numbers. I think about those things growing up on the back of a notepad, crafting my all-time favorite lineup, which is now in a new book that we wrote. And so it sort of comes full circle. But I guess what I would tell young people that are listening, like, if you truly have a passion for something, then chase it. Like, I was supposed to be a fourth-generation pharmacist, but instead, I'm this by-chance sports expert that winds up getting to work on ESPN and write sports books with a person I grew up idolizing on the radio. And so there's nothing that's too far out of reach.
Folks, that's the inspirational segment. Let's get back to Michael Vick is mentioned in the book. O.J. Simpson. There's something that everyone never forgets is O.J. fleeing in a white Bronco. Was there any way, maybe in the future book, because I know you guys are gonna have a trilogy. I know another one's coming out. At least 3, and then this might go on. This might be Fast and Furious. This might be the Fast and Furious thing where there's a Japanese spinoff. Who knows? You got only like Japanese baseball scores. Can we get Aaron Hernandez in here sometime?
I have watched a lot of Aaron Hernandez like Netflix documentaries and mockumentaries and things of that nature. What a crazy life and crazy story there is to tell on his behalf. It is astonishing. It's obviously incredibly sad the way that like basically everything that he touched turned to what it turned to. It's also super sad that like a former football player would be that mentally ill. It goes without saying. But look, I mean, as someone who worked at ESPN when this was all going down in his post-playing career, that's one of those things that you just never forget. I remember being in a control room with Greenberg and Golick and the Mike and Mike staff when they were reading his guilty verdict. It's one of those things you'll just never forget. Like people in my generation, too young to remember OJ, I watched Eric Hernandez get sent to a lifetime in jail. And that's just one of those things that's kind of a core memory, right, wrong, or indifferent.
You watch the Netflix show and it's just like, I'm so glad I never hung out with Aaron Hernandez because you never knew what was coming for you. You never knew when he was going to flip his lid.
That guy, man.
I think he permanently traumatized Wes Welker. Wes Welker probably would be a couple inches taller if it wasn't for that.
It's a sordid tale. It's bizarre to see what happened to that guy. It's just amazing that, that someone that we grew up watching was so good too. Like the way he played the tight end position, like he and Gronk revolutionized football. It just goes that look, on occasion, there's a dark side to people that you obviously don't want to touch. It's a sordid tale. It's a cautionary one. And is obviously an endlessly fascinating person that we'll probably read about and learn more about over the course of many, many years.
Greeny picked you out of a huge field. It's basically the America's Talent version of sidekick sports analyst guy. As Greeny, I mean, he's trying to rock the facial hair. It works for me. Doesn't necessarily work for him. Do you see there's a time in the future where now it's like Saved by the Bell, the reunion, and now you're moving into the main spot? Because to me, kid, you got the right stuff.
Oh, I appreciate you very much. Look, I mean, would I love to be Mike Greenberg's successor? Of course. So would 100 million people in the United States watching sports on a daily basis. What I can honestly say is that being in his orbit every day for the last 10 years, which I've done, has been learning through osmosis to such a degree that it's like getting a master's degree and doing this on a daily basis. Not only have I learned exactly how hard you work, but how well and how efficiently you need to work to do this job every single day. And if you surround yourself with greatness, if you chase it every single day, not to be cliche, but genuinely speaking, like there are a lot of people that want to do what I do. And so I cherish the opportunity every single day. And he has been as influential in my career as anybody. And who knows, maybe someday I'll get lucky and I'll be at that desk someday.
I'm feeling that you're the next Batman and you're going to find your own Robin in the future. This has been awesome. I got one final question for you, and I'm just going to hold this up to keep plugging the book.
You're a good man.
What's wrong with Eagles fans?
Okay, so you're asking an Eagles fan that question.
I'm just saying. I mean, I know now you're taking it serious, but when there's list after list that go against you and they keep talking about Eagles fans as some of the worst fans, we got to go there sometime.
So I'm not a big fan of using anecdotes to prove my point. I think it's very difficult to prove that Eagles fans are, let's say, on balance, worse than any other fan base. My opinion is that the Eagles fans have a reputation that precedes them. And so anytime you might see some misbehavior, shall we say, there's a lot of confirmation bias. Whereas if a Cowboys fan, for example, did the exact same thing, no one would bat an eyelash. I think there's a lot of that. So if next time you see some unruly fan behavior in Chicago or San Francisco or Glendale or anywhere else, just ask yourself, how would I react to this clip if it was taking place in Philadelphia? We should treat every situation like it the same. All these fans are idiots that get themselves in these situations, and I don't think any fan base is more idiotic than any other.
Hembo, that was a powerful interview. I don't think you need to do cardio later. That's how much of a workout you got in. I appreciate your time, folks. Let's get this book sold.
You're a good man.